Yeah, thank you. Hey, just wanted to mention everybody, we're trying to give a little time for David James to arrive. So it's now about 3:10, I think, or 3:11. We might give him just a couple more minutes. He's supposedly en route, so we'll just bear with us for a little while longer. Okay, it looks like David's running a little bit later, so we're going to start the meeting. Earl Jones here, and I think I'll run this meeting today. As you saw, you were sent out a copy of a agenda, and I want to just walk through that for a moment to sort of, I guess, explain some of the reasoning behind that. I thought it was really important for us to go back to the statute and see exactly what our mandate was. I know that in our initial meeting, we discussed many issues, but at the end of the day, I think that it's clear that we are going to be held to have responded to the questions or the issues that the legislature has set out for us to provide information for. And as I looked at those, I thought that they could be fairly neatly arranged into three buckets. Obviously, the first one dealing with the question of what is the sort of the governance authorities of the entities inside the consolidated government inside the county here. The second one about funding and taxing authority seems to make sense. And then the third one, which says exactly what are the services, how they distributed, seems to be a third bucket of issues. And as you see from section F of this part of the statute, it also says, and by the way, how should these things look in the future? So it seems like it might be possible to combine those two into a third group. And the idea here is to constitute the commission into three subcommittees to address these issues. Now, I might suggest that one alternative to this, if I think this is a question of what do the members want to do, how do they want to handle this? The larger issue that looks forward could be a result, could be done by as a committee of the whole, based upon the information that comes out of the first two groups. So I'd like to hear from you all what you think about the various approaches here, and then whether we can come to some consensus on whether we proceed with three from this point, or whether we proceed with two and then come back as a body of the whole to consider the issues in this third group. Any thoughts?
I'll go first.
Yeah.
This is Julie Rocky Adams, and I think that forming committees is a really strong way to go forward, because I think if we have group thought on everything, we might get really bogged down. So this might be a good way to put some things in baskets and take a deeper dive in them and then present them to the committee as a whole. So I, for one, am comfortable with moving forward with a committee structure.
And regarding the specifics as between 3 versus 2 and then 1, what are your thoughts on that?
I think that the breadth of issues is pretty broad. I think that even if we have 3, we could probably figure out how to have 4. So I would try to maybe keep it at 3 at the max.
Okay.
Just my 2 cents. So
Thanks. Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Anthony Piagentini, Metro Council District 19. I think I'm leaning towards the three committees, and I'm assuming the three committees are the three sub-bullets under number 2 on the sheet. Is that correct?
Under which?
Under number 2 of the memo?
Yes.
Yep. So, yeah, I would agree. I think three committees may be the way to go. And reason being, even if, for example, if one of these may be inclined to a broader conversation, which I mean, I think all of it will be inclined to a broader conversation at some point, I think it's important that maybe a subgroup or a committee gathers as much information as possible and summarizes it for the discussion at the larger group, right? My experience is simply that in the sort of committee of the whole, less decisions can certainly be made, but it's tougher to get work product done and summarize materials. So I think it would be helpful in all three instances to at least have the subgroups or committees summarize material, do the research, and consolidate it in a way that the committee of the whole can make a better and faster decision on it. So I would support having the three committee structure. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other thoughts?
If I may, this is Mary Ann Butler. Yes, I agree. I think breaking down into committees is a really good idea.
Councilman Ja'Cory Arthur, Louisville Metro Council District 4. I'm supportive of the committees and appreciate the breakdown of how they're listed. I'd like to just maybe have some elaboration on like legislative intent when it comes to statutory recommendations, that we're not just looking at recommendations for KRS 67C, but we could potentially look at recommendations elsewhere.
That's a good point. Here to address that?
Yeah, so the obviously the biggest portion of it would be 67C because that's what established Louisville. But the thinking as you can see under section 1 of our agenda, that is actually Mr. Jones actually copied and pasted that from the bill that passed. So that outlines a broader review than just 67C. So things that might be outside that. So the way I thought about it when we were putting the bill together was any concentration, any area where power resides, decision-making is made, this group would be looking at that and decide, is that the way it ought to be? Most things probably are, but that's kind of the scope. So it's any place where decisions are made on behalf of the citizens of Louisville. That's what we would review. Does that answer your question, Councilman?
It does, and I'm thinking about recommendations that might impact the rest of the Commonwealth and having an understanding that it might require changes elsewhere. I just wanted to make sure we weren't limited to just this statute.
I don't know if there's anything in particular you have in mind. If it affects the rest of the Commonwealth because it just does by necessity, I think maybe that's in play. But obviously, I don't think this committee is looking at, is the county structure globally, does that work but it's within the confines of Jefferson County. That's what we're looking at. And if it has impacts in other places, I guess, I don't know that would be closed off from the beginning, but I don't think this group's job is to look at best practices for the Commonwealth as a whole, unless it's centrally focused on Jefferson, and then it has ancillary effects on the rest of the community, the Commonwealth.
Thank you.
I have a question, Mr. Chair. Over here. Ken Fleming, District 48, State Representative. I want to ask the co-chair Nemus, maybe to other folks, what was the thought and intent on any type of positive or negative ramifications when it comes to, I got a big echo here, when it comes to Metro Council on the Metro government ordinances and such? We're focusing on KRS and other implications that might affect other statutes and so forth. But is that something that I guess the first item, the gaps, I guess the governance, so I'm trying to say, is that going to be included in our discussions and how it's going to affect?
Let me make sure I understand the question. So the question is whether or not we're going to review particular ordinances to determine whether or not they should be changed? Is that kind of the gist of the question?
Yeah, or yeah, the impact and so forth. Or are we going to go down that path and whatever we do on the state level, then the Metro Council will have to deal with it as such?
Yeah, so I mean, I'm only one member of the General Assembly and one member of this commission. The way I see it is we make sure the structure is what it ought to be, and then the individual power entities, Metro Council, Planning and Zoning, Clean Air Board, they would make the determination on what's right for their particular jurisdiction or area. So to answer your question, I don't think looking at Metro Council ordinances on this issue or that issue is part of our purview unless that ordinance has to do with the inner workings of how decisions are made. I don't think we're to make decisions on outcomes on policy. We're just going to make sure that the decision-making apparatuses, if that's the word, the plural there, is appropriate. So whether Metro Council passes ordinances that we agree with or not is not in our purview, in my view. Whether they have the right to decide that question, I think might be in our purview. Does that answer your question?
It does, and I think you're basically, what you're saying is that, that the Metro Council will have to deal and address those issues based on the structure that we come up with from a statute. And I think this task force and the Metro, or the General Assembly needs to be mindful of that. We're not going to get into all the idiosyncrasies and ordinances and so forth. That's getting out of our purview and becomes basically a cluster. Very difficult and very cumbersome to deal with all that stuff. So I just want to make sure that's where we are.
Yeah, that's for the council to decide. I disagree with a lot and agree with a lot, but that's their decision, not mine. I do want to come back, if I might, just real quickly, Mr. Chairman, to Councilman Arthur's question, because something came to mind. For example, the taxing structure. The question was, if you remember, are we going to do anything that might affect the rest of the Commonwealth? I'm hoping that part of our recommendation, and if I'm only one, then it won't be part of the recommendation. But I'm hoping that part of our recommendation will be a change in how cities are allowed to tax themselves. I know that's something the General Assembly's been deciding or looking at. And if that's something that we think would help Louisville, I think it could be part of our suggestion.
And I agree, and I hope that's a recommendation as well. Just to give you an example of what I'm thinking about, the Unified or Uniform Residential Landlord and Tenant Act, or UROTA, is very restrictive of what Louisville Metro government can and cannot do. So that's an example of something that we could change at the state level, which would grant us the powers locally to make those changes, not asking for this group to introduce those changes or have Metro Council have anything mandated, just simply letting us have the power of local control when it comes to tenant and landlord rights. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, Bonnie Jung, Jefferson County League of Cities. I'd like to just make sure that we're consistent what we're talking about suburban cities. On number 3, on the second page, it talks about small city perspective. Could we just be consistent and either call them suburban or home rule cities, as they are known for by state statute?
Yes, point taken, and we'll make that correction.
Thank you.
Yeah, just one other point on the issue we were just discussing earlier. I would assume that on the question of ordinances, again, it's a question of the authority and also the capacity, right? Whether or not the appropriate capacity is provided to the local government authorities to address issues that are critical to them that fall into these particular buckets. Okay. If we're okay with that, then let's proceed then to item number 2. Number 3 on the agenda, and that is, how are we going to be collecting this information? So these are some ideas that I've sort of thought of based upon some discussions I think we've had with some of the members of the commission, and some of them just sort of make sense based upon what our charter is of who might presumably have information regarding these particular issues. Obviously, this list is not exhaustive, but it's what I could think of, and I would obviously appreciate your views on whether or not it's adequate, whether it should be supplemented, who was left out, any other kinds of changes you all would suggest.
Senator Nemes was talking to me. Can you repeat the question?
That's all right, sure. I was asking you all to turn your attention then to item number 3. Yes. And whether or not in discussing how we shall collect information or facts, if you will, that are relevant to our answering the questions that we're charged to answer, whether the suggested sources are sufficient, whether you all would make amendments, additions, or think that this is heading in at least a direction that makes sense. Obviously, the idea here of looking back to the folks who were involved in the initial merger effort just seemed to me to make some sense. It's a question of who was here at the beginning, and then we have a point of view that I think we would benefit from. That one just seemed pretty obvious to me. I know some of these people may not be available, and if any of you all have connections with some of them who may not be readily available, that would be really helpful. Yes.
Mr. Chair, just one recommendation or thought. I think the list is good. The last bullet point says developers. I'm wondering if we expand that a little bit. And I will say, one of the things that is obviously a huge issue for any local jurisdiction is land development, use and development, right? So it makes total sense of why we put the word developers in here, but I'm wondering if we broaden it a little bit and just say the business community, including developers, because I do think, as one of the participants in here is GLI, right? I think it would be important to get certainly the opinion of developers, right, who have an interest in how these local jurisdictions work together and the future of the city. But obviously, I think business writ large, both large and small, might have a voice in that, right? So it's the only recommendation I may make to broaden that one category.
Okay, point taken. And of course, the reason I mentioned developers specifically is that, as I recall, one of the bases for the merger was to cut down on red tape for economic development in the county, having to accomplish or to check in with multiple municipal organizations in order to get that done. So that's why that was singled out. But I can take your point about the broader business community, understanding that it will also include those who want to develop property or other economic development initiatives in the consolidated city. Yes.
If I might suggest, since we've got the ability to do virtual, why don't we invite some, like the Lexington mayor, maybe someone in their CFO or something, because they've been merged for quite some time and they seem to be doing it well. Maybe we can learn something from them.
Okay. Now, of course, this is a question. I'm assuming they have a different statutory basis for their merger, assuming that that is the case? Was that something, do you know what that was passed by the legislature? Do you know when that was and what motivated it versus what happened here in Jefferson County?
It's a different statute. I think it was passed before 67C was. And there's substantial differences. There's similarities, but there's substantial differences. Nonpartisan, no suburban cities are two of the big ones.
Did they ever have them and they were eliminated, or they never had them?
I don't know the answer to that question. I don't think they ever had them.
No,
I'm
they
not sure.
did have some small cities. They eliminated them.
Okay.
They have some very strong HOAs now.
At the time of merger, they did. I mean, they may have had it before merger. They've not had it since merger, but I don't know I don't know how
They
many
do
they
not
had.
have any.
Yeah.
Okay.
So maybe on that, to that suggestion, Lexington specific, but League of Cities more generally. And we do have a League of Cities, obviously member appointed.
Mr. Chairman, along with volunteers, do we need maybe also a representative from Suburban Fire or Louisville Fire as well, other than the commission person? And also, I'll be happy to try to find someone, we talked about this today, from a home rule city that was around back then. Miriam, maybe you can help me with that. That would be somebody that could speak for it talks about suburban city perspective. Somebody that was around, maybe we can get them to come as well. If they were during merger in 2000.
Yeah, and if anybody's got any suggestions there. You mean somebody who was, for example, who had a position as mayor or some official of such a city?
Yes, sir. Maybe I'll go back and see through the league board who was serving maybe as the president of the league, or a couple of the folks have already passed away. I know that were involved in that, but we can find someone.
And can I just respond to your question? You said something about fire districts. I have here volunteer. It's my terms now. I'm new to this process. So I call them volunteer in quotes, fire districts. That may not be the correct terminology, but my intent was to cover that group that you just.
Yeah, just add those with it, because you do have professional suburban fire districts.
Yes.
And of course, I think Chief Driesbach is on too, but just like the others, maybe someone from one of those other districts would be good.
So you mean the professionals, they're no longer volunteers or?
Or both.
Some of them are. I think they're organized under KRS Chapter 75, so I think they call themselves Chapter 75 Fire Protection Districts.
Yeah.
I'm curious what the commission thinks about clarifying our window of time. I know we have a lot of city information since merger to now, but there's also city data that goes into the 90s, into the 80s, and how important that might be when we're trying to figure out a baseline for our accomplishments and insufficiencies. But I don't know what that window would look like. I'm just curious if we want to try to establish one.
Can you clarify that? I'm just trying to understand, you're trying to understand or trying to pull data that says how the city was operating back before?
So looking at our duties, 5A, searching and a thorough review of the accomplishments and insufficiencies, we can look at the past, couple of decades, but what are we comparing those accomplishments and insufficiencies to actually measure them? How do we measure success? How do we measure failure? And I thought maybe looking at the city of Louisville and Jefferson County prior to merger might give us an idea of just knowing what we've accomplished or what we've gotten better at or what we're failing at and need to improve on. So just trying to clarify what is the window of time that we're looking at information. Police responses since merger versus police responses in the 90s or in the 80s prior to merger. Just an example.
Okay, I guess my only question would be, where would you think we might get that information? What's the best source?
We have an open data portal. Some of that information is limited as far as the time frame, but I would assume some of that information is archived within Louisville Metro government. We might not just have any consistent timeline going across it. As far as the window of time, I'm open to suggestions, but I figured since we're looking at the past almost 20 years, maybe we try to look at the 20 years beforehand, just so we're looking at the same sets of data and comparing them.
Could I speak to that, please? Bonnie Jung. I have the merger 2.0 that was done in 2011, and I have read through all 157 pages. What I really hope that we don't do is get tied down in some of this data. I think this is a really good starting point. However, the way that this survey was done, and I don't want to pick through it other than at one time when they did it, there was 714,000 folks that lived in Louisville Metro, but the survey was only done to 1,092 folks. And in some of those zip codes, there was only one person that might have filled out that survey. So I don't want us to get bogged down in something that's going to go on a shelf. I think that we can take the recommendations from the 2011 and maybe work from those recommendations. Either that or go and look through the zip codes that are possibly still having or still saying that they are having issues. So I just don't want us to spend time doing another one of these if it's not going to be productive. And if you're only going to have one person out of a whole zip code, that can't represent the whole zip code. So maybe taking the executive summary or the recommendations from the 2011 2.0 and using maybe that as a baseline to start from.
Well, I have to tell you regarding that was my intention to look at the summary. Because I don't think we have the capacity inside this commission to go beyond that. Now, it may be that if we, as you see, one of the recommendations here is to hire some kind of consultant. It may be that somebody else could do that, but I'm not sure that I see the value of it either. And I'm not certain that, Mr. Chikori, that was your point.
No, but to the point that was just made, it sounds like that survey in itself was insufficient if we don't have proper representation from the citizens of the city. And we don't have to go beyond the scope of that summary or the past 20 years. I just think it's important as we talk about what has worked well, what do we need to improve on, what are we comparing it to? And if we're only comparing it to a summary of information that's largely not representative of the city, I don't think we're going to have the best product.
You know, you're bursting my bubble because I have come to believe that life was hell before merger. Yes, maybe that's why I can be totally impartial in this commission. That really is a joke, folks. But I do have a sense that things have been better since. Let's put it that way. Okay. Now, on the question of a consultant, you notice that I think there's a thought here that we might engage someone. I think the name of Paul Coombs has come up. I know many of you all have worked with Paul in the past. I've worked with him in my capacity at GE Appliances. I know he's worked for the city on occasion. I know he's worked with other public entities as well. So I think he's got a broad base of experience in the community and is well thought of. Again, I at this point in time don't have a sense of what the exact charter might be, but I think that'll be something which will come out of the process as we go through our committee work. Yes.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I would agree that I think contracting with Paul specifically is the way to go. First of all, he did a lot of the analysis on the original merger, so I think it would be easy to essentially update the numbers and see were the assumptions accurate, how much they were correct, off, why they were off, right? So I think he would have a unique ability to sort of carry forward that information. And I think that should absolutely be part of, right, sort of the scope of what he does, right? We already did this work. We made some assumptions. Did they pan out or not, right? How did that come out in the wash 20 years later? He has done a lot of work for the city, most recently going into the pandemic and the economic downturn, did a lot of economic analysis for the potential impact of the city, and he's done other work on behalf of Metro Louisville. So he has an intimate relationship and has always turned out good work product for the city. And then the only other thing I would advocate that is sort of part of his charge, which I think comes into some of the questions under sort of B and C in the charter, which is, and look, again, this came up last night at a Metro Council debate. We annexed a very small, it was 16 homes into St. Matthews. It once again sparked a lively debate about, the merits of annexation. And one of the areas that is still lacking in detail, in sort of numerical fact-based detail, is we can very easily say this tax revenue is being removed from the city. It's from Metro, and that's usually the insurance premium tax. So that is a very easily quantifiable number. What we have never really gotten to the bottom of is given the responsibilities that then the suburban city, in this case, St. Matthews, took over, what is the reduction in cost or reduction in risk due to the services supplied by that suburban city, that then you can make a more accurate equation on what is the actual impact to the city and those residents and all of that. So I think that does need to be part of it. And I would add, as this has come up as a question, that, the state has, in current state statute, has thresholds for the creation of new cities. And maybe Co-Chair Nemus can clarify, Representative Nemus can clarify, I think it's 3,000 is the minimum. Am I wrong?
It's 6,000 for Louisville, but it's 3,000 for the rest of the state.
3,000 for the rest of the state. So, but the point is there's.
I'd say for Jefferson County, not Lowell.
Thank you. Yeah. So even for the state, there is a minimum of 3,000. We have many cities, suburban cities within merged government that are much smaller than that, right? And I think the question does need to be as part of both looking at the as letter C indicates in the commission's mandate, a thorough review of intergovernment relations between Louisville Metro and suburban cities, special services districts, et cetera. I think part of that does contemplate, is there a threshold, right? The state contemplates a threshold of which a city should not be created under a certain threshold. So is there a threshold of which, yeah, okay, it makes sense. There's a certain tipping point, right? Where the services revenue combination makes sense. Or is there not, right? Even if a suburban city is, no matter what, there is no tipping point of when the population of a suburban city makes sense from a services and financial point of view. So I think that question, maybe a few scenarios looking at some of our smaller cities, some of our mid-sized cities, and then some of our largest cities to look at, is there differentiation on the combination of tax revenue they acquire plus services they offer compared to that relationship with metro government. So I do think, sort of expanding on his comparison to merger should include that analysis. Thank you.
Co-Chair Jones, Ken Fleming, obviously we're looking at a scope of work for the contractor, whoever we get to come on board to go through and analyze this. And we can sit here and talk about a lot of these measurements and what we expect and so forth and so on. But using your 3-committee structure and whoever's assigned with that, I'd suggest or put on the table that whoever that makes up that committee, sit down with, like, I guess, Dr. Coombs to go through and give them, I guess, more of a meat of the bone type of approach in doing that. And I talked with Dr. Coombs when this was going through the General Assembly some time ago, and he works with a gentleman from UK, Dr. Bill Holt, I think I have that correctly, who teams with Dr. Coombs on some of these issues and approaches and so forth. I think you'll probably get him involved, but I suspect that this group, I sit down with with the contractor, with, Dr. Coombs to go through and develop the scope of work, and then come back to this committee in an expeditious way and say, here's our scope of work. What are we missing? What are we hitting? Or what do we need to avoid if anything, and then go through that process in doing that. But I feel confident Dr. Coombs would be more than happy to do this based on, what Tony said a few minutes ago. About his involvement and being very familiar with this Metro Council as well as the state in general. I know he's been used on a state level on a couple occasions. They've been used more of UK when it comes to research and so forth. So anyway, like I said, I that's what I would suggest, having the committee go through this, work out the scope of work, come back to the committee, dissect it, and then they'll be off and running.
Okay, I think that makes sense. Let me just clarify one thing. Are you suggesting that the commission approach both of them for a draft of a statement of work, or suggest to one of them, Mr. Coombs, that he work with Mr. Holt or Dr. Holt in doing that?
Yeah, Chairman Jones, I think they will be in tandem. They'll work together. I don't We can go to them separately, but I think it'd be more prudent to use both of their experience and intellect and resources, both from a U of L perspective as well as a UK perspective, to come and look at this information in a very, very thorough manner. So having them both together as a team to talk with us, yes, they can go and put forth a scope of work, but my experience from my business background and so forth, I think you need to sit down, and it almost goes back to a quality-based selection process when I worked with the Corps of Engineers and other federal governments. You identify one or a group of people and you go through and talk about what you would like to accomplish. Then they come up with, okay, I understand where you're coming from, I understand your framework, and what you're trying to achieve. Then I'll digest that and then come back with here's a proposal, here's a draft of what we're intending the scope of work to be. And then it's our job to say, yep, you're spot on. Or, nope, you need to go down this path or this particular issue or whatever, and then we can work that out. And then they come up with a cost to do that.
Yeah.
That's my experience.
Understood, understood.
Just wanted to add that I'd be supportive of that as long as we don't talk about sports at all.
Sports?
I did have, I thought whether we were going to get into that, but I wanted to have, if I could, Mr. Piacentini, I wanted a little clarification on your point about, I don't know whether you were saying, you weren't talking about optimum sizes of towns or cities. At least that's, I guess, my question to you. Or were you saying, given the fact that cities come in these various sizes, to simply gather data about, let's say, is that a question of effectiveness? Is it a question of how efficient they are in using the resources they're capturing? I'm just trying to understand where we go with that.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair. So first of all, I'll agree with Representative Fleming. I'll defer to a subcommittee to really scope this out and get this moving. But just for sake of clarity for those that end up participating in the subcommittee, I would imagine, as is very common in any enterprises, business or whatever, that there's different economies of scale, right, for small, medium, large. And we have all three of those inside Jefferson County related to suburban cities. So I do think that whatever analysis we do related to looking at this, how, for a lack of better way of putting it, cost benefit ratio of what happens when you annex or create a suburban city and its relationship with Metro, that we don't look at it as only one model. We examine it maybe at different levels. What does that mean for a suburban city that's less, I'm going to make up thresholds. I'm not saying we do it this way, but less than 1,000 people or less than 3,000, because that's the threshold the state has set up. What happens if it's 3,000 to 6,000, because that's the Jefferson County threshold? And then what happens if it's over 6,000? So I'm just saying, I think, there might be benefit in looking at that analysis in terms of different sizes and different types of suburban cities that we have, because we have a wide variety of suburban cities here in Jefferson County. They are not all the same. And one of the things that significantly differentiates them is their size. So, yeah, I was just advocating for some analysis on again, for lack of a better term, the economies of scale on different size structures. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other comments or points on this area here? 3 or 4?
Mr. Co-Chair, I think.
Can I ask a question of another committee member?
So,
We're going back into what was the history of a lot of this, and I know we don't want to spend too much time on that, but I do think that it is important that I believe that there was a promise made to suburban cities when merger happened, that it was a 12-year threshold. Am I making that up? But I think, Bonnie, wasn't there a promise made when merger happened that suburban cities would would have a 12-year hiatus, and then they would be allowed to become whatever they wanted to be.
No, it was it's Mary Ann Butler. It was like a moratorium on creating new cities or annexing anything to make your own city larger. So there was a 12-year hold on that.
Okay.
Now, cities could merge if they wanted to. There were several cities out there that have merged within those 12 years, but they didn't expand their boundaries. The two just merged together and became one.
Yeah, but I do think that's an important bullet point to make in the historical context, that in bringing merger together, there was a promise made to suburban cities in that initial document, and that it's a legitimate point to look at going forward. So thank you.
Well, then, do you have that? We need to find that document if that's something that we're going to be focusing on. Are you familiar with such a provision?
It's the, it was in the statute. We just removed it in House Bill 314. But it was in Chapter 67C as it was passed.
So what was removed was what? The hiatus on merger,
The prohibition on incorporation and annexation.
which was there for, was it a permanent prohibition, or was it one that had a time limit on it?
I don't remember the language. I think it may have had a 12-year time limit that lasted 20 years. I don't recall, but I'll get that and send it out to the committee.
Yeah, Mary Ann said 12 years. I thought it was 12 years too, so.
It was 12 years from the time of merger.
Mr. Co-Chair Jones, David James here. While we're talking about this issue of data and data collection, I invited Monica Harmon, who's on the line up there, who's the CFO for Louisville Metro, to talk to us about what capabilities they have, because in the House Bill 314, it talks about gathering data about revenues that are gained from inside the urban services area versus the unincorporated and expenses spent. And so I asked her, what capabilities do we actually have to be able to do that? And I invited her to be able to talk to us about what we can and cannot do and where those gaps are of data collection are, if you could call on her possibly.
Right, but you were hoping that could happen today in today's session.
Sorry?
You were hoping that could happen in today's session.
Yes.
Okay, why don't we just do that now with Monica is is with us. Are you there?
Yes, I'm here. Thank you. I wanted to share that in part of the USD suburban district, every year when we do property taxes, I'm sorry, I'm in a car. We report the cost of the services that are provided strictly within the USD that are not available to the citizens of the entire county. And that information is available. It's not in the detailed level of line item by line item that we provide that, but it is available and reported in a summary total. One of the things that I noted on in the bill, House Bill 314, that there was also capital. I think that'll be a larger challenge, just because some capital projects don't necessarily have a defined boundary within the USD versus outside the USD. So it'd be something that we may have to rely on allocations and proration. But after looking at this, I think if all the bill is calling for is what services are provided in the USD that are not provided to the entire merged government, then that is currently being done and could be continued.
Mr. Chairman, if I might, that is not what the bill intended. I'm trying to pull it up. The bill intends a full audit of the USD services taxes, where it comes from inside and outside the USD and what they're paid for. The purpose of the audit is to ensure that that we know, again, where taxes are coming from and where they're going.
Okay.
So the services being provided, that's not the anticipation. Here's the Here's the language. The consolidated local government, it's in addition to what was already there. So this is new language that was,
Tell us the section.
certainly. It's on page 17 of the statute, and it's section 7 sub 3. The new language that was codified and became law a couple months ago is the consolidated local government shall provide at least an annual reporting to the Urban Service Tax District Board and the legislative body of the consolidated local government containing but not limited to detailed operating and capital expenditures of each service performed by the consolidated local government. I think maybe what we could do, I don't know if, Ms. Harmon, if this would satisfy, but maybe what we could do is I know it'd be the first time that a broader audit would be done, is to do it in the context of this committee to help you guys out with that, to kind of figure out what we're looking for. And then it has to be done annually after that, but you'll have a template to go by, I think. Maybe that's the way we ought to handle it.
Well, I think it's going to be, it will be a big lift if we're looking at identifying services by provided, by service. That is going to be a challenge because obviously there's numerous services provided, but certainly it's not something that we can't overcome. It just won't be easily generated, on the first go around. I'll just put it that way. But we do maintain and continue to audit, and those things can certainly be accomplished. It's just going to be a big lift for Metro to provide on an annual basis.
And maybe that will be one of the recommendations, is to relax that annual recommendation perhaps. But I do think it's really important that the people of Pick Your Zip Code know how much money they're paying and how many services they're receiving as compared to the rest of the other areas.
Sure.
In that regard, does the statute define what services, what the term services means?
I think it's all. We intended it for it to be all. That's why it says detailed operating and capital expenditures. So we didn't want any wiggling away and saying it was just part. We intend for every dollar that comes into Metro to be accounted for, knowing where it came from. And we intend that every dollar that is spent by Metro to be accounted for and know where it goes to.
Are you just talking tax dollars and not grant or other sources of funding?
All governmental funds.
All governmental funds.
And if the government is appropriating it, it's a governmental fund, obviously.
I don't disagree with that. What I'm asking though, and what will be helpful for Metro to be able to report that is if a service is meant to serve the entire county, but only certain citizens avail themselves of it, does that still view it? Does this committee, we need to know if this committee is, or the legislation is expecting that we report based on who avails themselves of the service, not that it was limited by, where they were located.
Yeah, I don't think that. I mean, like, for example, TARC is probably used more in one jurisdiction, one zip code more than another, less than another, more than another. But TARC is something that's provided generally, I think, not perfectly, but generally to the entire community, I think. And so I think that's probably I don't know the answer on how you would do something like a TARC where it's available. That's probably a bad example because it's not available equally to everyone.
There are a lot of services that are certainly meant to be available to everybody, but they do not necessarily, people do not necessarily utilize them. And so I think we need to, this will require a deeper discussion to finalize what you're really looking for, because this is a bigger challenge, I think, than maybe what is contemplated when this was initially written.
Yep, and I think those things can probably be asterisked and handled differently, but the whole of what we're looking for is for transparency, which my constituents don't think we're getting right now. I think Juliet, Rocky Adams, and Mike Neiman said.
Yes, this is Senator Nemus. I think that we want to know everything the city does and how it's funded and how it's utilized. So to say that it's used by one part of the city and not, I don't think is needed. It's just what can be used by where. So let's not get bogged down into distinguishing the old county and the city, inner city, except for where there is actual differences in the taxation and money that can only be used in one area or the other. So let's not, it's not part of the city against the other. It's the whole city as it works and as it can work better.
Yeah, and
Well,
I'll follow up with Mike, and I think that maybe Monica will chime in after. I tend to disagree with Monica's assessment regarding utilization. I think what we are looking for, at least what I'm looking for, I don't want to project on the rest of the commission, but what I'm looking for is the monies that go into Metro and then how they are divvied up. This, to me, is more of a transparency thing and not a utilization thing.
okay, so let me ask this question. How is our budget document our it not communicating how those tax dollars are used currently? How
Sure,
are
you
we
can.
not being as transparent as you're looking for right now?
So, Monica, hi, this is Councilman Piagentini.
Hi.
Good afternoon. So, yeah, I think, for example, I'm going to pick on some random sections of the budget, okay? Just, I think, to clarify, I think, what we're getting at and
Sure.
differentiate between expenditure and utilization, the libraries, right? So, libraries are spread throughout the city, right? Because of population moves that we've seen over the past 10 years, I think where libraries were in relation to population density has changed. That is not a commentary on how much somebody uses the library, right? So in other words, if a library with, and I'm going to make up distances, right? If a library, if we find that libraries, and I'm going to make up distances and make up geographic areas, right? Waterson, Gene Snyder, right? If we find out there are no libraries outside the Gene Snyder, which there aren't, I think, there are a handful between the Waterson and the Gene Snyder. There's a bunch inside the Waterson, and then you can draw other circles. For example, 1 mile, 3 mile distances from each library. You might find libraries that have 10,000 people that live within 3 miles, whereas others have 100,000 people that live within 3 miles. That doesn't mean that's no commentary on utilization. That's commentary on where are we spending dollars in relation to proximity of population. So the library that has 10,000 people around it might get more utilization than one that's 100,000 people around it, but where we put them. And so I'm just using that as a very tiny thing, but there is an example of a budget line item where we can look at where they're located and do some analysis on how that is being dispersed throughout the city. But that doesn't then, I'm not going to measure, or you can use as a secondary measure, what the utilization of it is. So for example, I will say where this gets interesting, and we've done some back of the napkin calculations, is LMPD. That becomes a little more complicated because LMPD is not allocated, but not even closely allocated by population. For example, the first division has, the 8th division has roughly, I want to say it's 10 times less officers per capita than the first division does. But that's based on crime statistics, right? So the made some decision, the executive branch has made some decisions and allocations based on statistics that are based on utilization, which is, calling it the 911, for example. But nonetheless, understanding how LMPD, for example, and expenditures are dispersed, we can say it's proportionate to crime statistics, that's fine, but at least we understand how those tax dollars are being used and where they're being used. And we're having a rational conversation about it. I think that's the point.
This is
Well, I mean, this-
Centennial, if I may, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, I'd like to make a point here before we get before the entire meeting gets dissolved into this issue. And I say that because the point I think that everyone is making about the need for information and transparency is very well taken. However, it would seem to me that we have to be careful that the data really report what the effect of also somehow accurately reflect the impact of the data. So for example, Mr. Piangentini, you say libraries as an example. I think you'd have to make certain that you somehow normalize that data to understand when population changes occurred and when the capital investments were made. And on the police thing, I would hope that we would be able to somehow normalize those data as well to make certain that the mere fact of the dollars being more heavily spent in one area versus another appropriately reflected by some formula, the dollars per crime or dollars per whatever. So I just think that this is probably not an appropriate discussion for this committee at this point. But should be one that goes, I'm sorry, for the full commission, but should go to the committee for a more thorough analysis where it's supported by let's say, some people with expertise who can help us solve the problem in all of its complexity. That's my suggestion in the event. So, Monica, unless you have something more you want to add, I think we're probably can wait to call you back for one of those committee meetings.
Senator Neal has nothing more to say. Thank you for the courtesy.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, before
Yes.
we leave number 4,
Yes.
I think perhaps we should ask a couple of our members to contact Mr. Coombs and have a report for us, for you and for me to present to the rest of the committee at the next meeting. So I don't know who are the best people to do that. I know Representative Fleming has reached out to him. Maybe he and David James can together reach out to him and then come up with some thoughts to present to you and me, so then we can present it to the rest of the committee for the next meeting.
You all good with that?
I haven't asked him yet, so.
You just got volunteered.
David,
Voluntold.
did you hear?
I
Okay,
didn't hear it, but he said sure.
you're cooking for the next meeting.
Okay, that's good.
And then if we're going to break up into 3, and I think that was I don't think there was any objection to that. My thinking is for each member to look at the 3 committees and then make I want to be on committee number 1, or I want to be on committee number 2 or 3, and put them in order so we can, if there are 3 committees or 15 members, my thought is that we divide them into 5 people each and then have myself chair one, co-chair Jones chair one, and then have someone else like President James or Senator Adams or someone chair the other one, but then we populate them with 5 of us. So each committee will be populated with 5. And if that's agreeable, then to just make suggestions on what your ordering of what you want to be on is. So then Chairman Jones and I can get together and try to match the preferences as best we can.
I think that makes sense. I would just say though, that I think we should be careful that that the committees are appropriately representative of the various members of the commission. Okay. Okay, so then you all are do you want to just send those in to Genevieve? Then we can get that input and go from there. That then leaves us to this notion of what about our schedule for citizen input? I think we discussed at our last meeting that would be an important part of our effort here. Now, I sort of put down a schedule here. I'm not sure this is going to work. You all may have different notions on this. I was thinking of the spring of 23 to start this, mainly on the assumption that between now and then, we basically be doing the work of the committees and hopefully come out with something that we could actually Sorry. Sorry about that. To start these meetings with the community in the spring of '23 on the assumption that between now and then, we'd be working in committees to come up with proposals or analyses that we'd want then to get input regarding. That may be a little short, given the fact that we'll lose a month at least towards the year end. But so I'd like first two comments from everybody, whether or not you think that's appropriate time frame, February, March, or whether it should be longer than that. And then beyond that, I was suggesting that we have 6 sessions spread throughout the community.
I think that we should stretch it out. I was just relating to Senator Adams, how she gets called councilwoman and I get called alderman. I think our citizens need as much time as we can possibly give them. I would also add that we follow policy that we've kind of set with Metro Council about citizen input and making sure there's an ongoing online survey of some sort that we can utilize for anyone who can't come to these events. And they can just give the feedback whenever they need to, and we set a deadline for that. As far as feedback in general goes, I think we can do something to Louisvillians, we could do something for Louisvillians, but I strongly believe this will be best if we do something with Louisvillians. So having more opportunity for them to give feedback and work with us along the process, I think it'll make it even more stronger.
Mr. Chairman, I just want to clarify, this Ken Fleming. So we're going to be working from committees from this point until January, February, March, April, is that correct?
That's what I think it might require, but I mean, it may be that as we get into it, I'll have to adjust that, I suspect.
I'd like to give a suggestion in terms, I don't know, I don't know how long it will take if we, work with Dr. Coombs for him to go through this process. I would like to see if we can get that going earlier. And then either we can do it by, I don't know, by email or whatever, in terms of what our conversation with President James and I can maybe talk with Dr. Coombs and say, here's the parameter. And then he can come back to us with a scope of work, with an attached cost to that. And then, like I said, we can go through email or whatever sooner rather than later. If we wait until during March to meet, to go through this and react to what the scope of work is, that's getting a little far down the road.
That's not the proposal.
Huh?
That wasn't the proposal. The proposal was we would be working between now and then. But he would be, in other words, he would be working with us during that time frame, but we would be in the interim, if you will, begin to address the issues that we've been to.
Okay, I guess my one to clarify, then one clarify. I just didn't know what the group want in terms of to have input on the scope of work.
Well, I mean, okay, so what were you thinking in terms of how long it would take him to come up with a proposal? Because it really comes down to, what are you telling him? What are you all looking to tell him we're looking for him to do?
The initial conversation with him would be, here is what we're thinking of, and this is what, based on our conversations within this group, either formally or informally, this is what we're looking at, having him digest, and then have him come back to us with a scope of work.
I understand that. So my question is, do you think that you have enough from today's discussion to have that discussion with him, or do you need more?
For myself, I do, but the committee might think differently. If we want to go through and have more individual discussions with him, that'd be fine. I mean, I'm flexible. I'll just threw it out there as a thought. I mean, I'll work with both chairs of how you want this process. I just don't know how much time he needs to go through and pull this information up and just really go through a thorough process in doing that. So, I just want to make sure we get on it going quicker than pushing it down the road.
Well, might I suggest this? If you could, in your initial discussions with him or them, sooner rather than later, I'd like to understand from them what, based on what the charter, our charter, and information that they already think they have access to, or sources of information that they are familiar with, what do they think the scope of work should be? And then let's, if you all could then send that out to the full commission, then we could have something to react to. And if it turns out that we think it may be a little too skinny or too, just not on the mark, we can then make some suggestions to you all to go back and have a redo. I think that may be a way, Mr. Fleming, to accelerate the timetable and to sort of start us off with something meaty to work on.
That's fine. So I'm just like I said, if whatever y'all see going the process, I just want to make sure that we just keep the ball rolling. And because my initial thought was waiting until like March, and I know even though we'll work on it, I just want to make sure everybody has I guess skin in the game, if you want to call it that, in terms of what the scope of work is. So that's all I was my point.
Yeah, no, just to be clear, my intention was not that we would be just sitting around between now and March,
Right.
but that we'd be working in the interim, but that would be the time we'd have hopefully some work product that we could share with the community. Okay. Let's see. On the question of budget, by the way, I did have that down as a note. I guess we should start by asking the Metro Council President, do you have a comment on this? If that's a fair question.
Let's do it as cheaply as possible.
And that's one of the reasons, Chairman, I thought that it might be a good idea to have somebody from the state and somebody from the city to talk with Mr. Coombs. They'll get the price and then they can hopefully, in your discussions, make a recommendation on how we might try to pay for it.
Finance it, okay.
Once we know what the cost might be, it'll help us have that conversation. As far as the cost for those 6 meetings around the community, I think that we could probably, this is roughly, we could probably do that for probably less than 15,000. There's some equipment we have to rent and things like that, but I think that would be the max that would cost.
Okay. Well, I think we've come to the end of the agenda at this point. Anybody have any additional comments? Anything we should cover before we adjourn? Any open questions?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
this is Bonnie. Someone just texted me and wanted to make sure that all the committee meetings and everything are within the, that they'll be able to see them either on Zoom, that they are open, and also to make sure that we follow the 24-hour notices of public meetings, but they want to make sure that they can see all the committee meetings as well. Since they should be transparent
Well,
public
we'll
meetings.
frankly have to look to staff to support us in that regard because I confess that
Well, for instance, at Douglas Hills, my city hall, I can hold about 75 people. I do my council meetings by Facebook, by Zoom, and also by physical participation. It would not, if you wanted to have a meeting there, it could be, you could see it on our city Facebook, you could, see it through Zoom by the link or else attend. So the cost for that, unless you have to set up something special that we all look good, would be zero, because that's just a matter of setting up the Zoom and making sure, pressing a button on Facebook. So I'm offering our city hall out in the East End, if you guys want to have a meeting there. And we can make sure the public notice is put out as well.
Well, of course, I'm not familiar with whatever the technical requirements might be for a meeting that have to be available to the entire metropolitan area. So if, and maybe President James, you can address that point.
Yeah, I think that would work. I think uh, if you give me permission, I guess maybe the best way to say that, I would like to utilize a couple things as far as it relates to that. We're going to have to find locations for committee meetings. And then we need 6 locations around the county. I can work on securing the 6 locations around the county with Bonnie's being one of those, if that's okay with you. Or maybe what I'll do is I'll find 6 locations, I'll send to both of you, and you all tell me if that meets your approval or not, and then we can go from there, if that's possible.
We have plenty of time to look at those 6 locations, I think. It'd be great to go ahead and think about areas of town, but I don't want to get bogged down with, where we're going to meet in March on those things. I think, let's get the committees together. The chairman of the committee can meet with the committee members and see where they can meet. We'll make sure it's technologically available and then move forward.
Okay.
Okay, any other issues that we need to discuss?
Are we okay with moving forward on drafting a public survey? Something I can just share out with folks before the next meeting?
Are you volunteering to create it?
Absolutely. There's also a group in the mayor's administration that works on public participation. And of course, we have a framework from surveys we've done in the past.
Councilman, are you going to take some of the questions from the first one? Yeah, that's a good idea. I think mostly if you looked through it, I think it was dealing with governmental services and safety. One was garbage. How satisfied are you with public transportation? It was very interesting. So they already have, I think, 4 or 5 specific categories that you could pull from.
Okay. If there's nothing else, then let's adjourn the meeting. We'll see you all same time next month. And I guess we are meeting next month. We haven't got a location. My assumption is we're meeting here, though. Anybody have a view on that?
Why don't we make the default here, but then if it changes, we'll send it out. There's nowhere in Louisville that we shouldn't be able to get to. So, I mean, any of us. So if it changes, then that'll be a part of the, as early as we can possibly get it out to people.
Thanks, everybody.